So this happened back in my first year of high school, and in my opinion, you can't just move anyone into a neighbourhood without a background check. I can't even recall how many times I've said this to people, and how many times I was told that old saying in return. I've lived in a small town all my life, and the only crimes that are ever heard of is robbery of houses. Murders, kidnappings, and bigger crimes of that nature were extremely rare in the 2000s onwards, but in the 90s, it was a totally different story. Back then, everyone knew each other, and if someone didn't know you, they knew most of or all of your family members. But ultimately, everyone, young and old in this small town, can and will agree on this. If there is an outsider, we're all on high alert. I've seen a few newcomers here, and I would hear a huge majority of the locals trying to figure out who they were, and even telling my generation and below to be careful and watch our backs. So my sister and I did just that. We stayed at home and never left without our mum or stepdad in tow, and they made sure of it too. So some new people had moved in across the street from our place. It was no big deal for us, as we were only at home 90% of the time. No one knew these people, so as mentioned earlier, quite a few people in the town were on high alert. They had a right to be. Back then it was safe to go out at night, and the elderly residents could comfortably sit on their porches without any worry. One night we went to the store for snacks and some frozen pizzas, as no one felt like cooking, and it was around 6 or 7 in the evening. Turning onto our street on our return, always being aware of our surroundings, I saw a man wearing dark blue jeans and a black shirt, and he was messing with our apartment door. I interrupted my sister and mother, who were talking, to ask them, "Why is that dude by our door?" It was dark except for our car headlights and a light from the building across the street, specifically a first-floor apartment light where we spotted a man leaning against the wall, and he was watching. "Let's go ahead and get out while that man is right there," my mum said, grabbing her weapon and directing my sister and I to stay close to her. It was then that the guy leaning against the wall began walking towards the centre of the road, anxiously shoving his hands into his pants pockets. I tried to get a look at his face, but he kept it turned away from us, looking around the apartment complex as if he was looking for someone. We got to Complex C Breezeway, when I saw the guy who was at our door hurrying from around the building to head back across the street. Once in the house, we realized that the guy who had been watching was on lookout, and upon noticing our car returning, he tried to warn his friend, the guy that was at our door. We locked up and made sure everything was still in place before my mum told me to barricade the door. Before that incident, we've actually been doing that every night, barricading the door. Though I'll admit I've had some nights where I haven't because I was tired or sore from gym class. But needless to say, that night I did it immediately, and the next following days. Thankfully, nothing happened. One evening I'd been working out, so was sore all over, but my mum was firm in making me barricade the door as my sister didn't want to do it, and my stepdad was at work, so it was up to me. I admit I lazed around until 9:30, 10 p.m. before doing it, then headed to sleep. The next morning, as we were leaving for my mum to take me to school, my mum was locking up, or at least trying to. "What the hell?" she said, causing me to turn around to see her struggling with the lock that was completely loose. She fiddled with trying to put the lock back into place, but nothing was working, and she was getting frustrated. It was clear that someone had taken our doorknob off, or at least tried to before giving up and trying to fix it to make it seem like they hadn't. She tried to fix it and gave up, and despite me telling her not to take me to school, she took me anyway. We were really anxious about what was going on. I mean, our doorknob was loose. Anyone could walk in. My mum picked up my stepdad from work, told him what was going on, so got the maintenance man to come fix the door. And later that day, everyone's door had new locks and deadbolts fitted. No one was happy, but the manager didn't care. And on top of that, the gossipers were talking about a resident in Complex D who had abruptly moved. We didn't find out until a few days later that someone had reported the woman having 2 guys living with her who were known criminals and not on her lease due to past arrests for break-ins. No one knew where she and the guys had gone. They just up and left. Over dinner, while my sister washed the dishes, my stepdad was talking about it all with a close friend on the phone who worked on the police force. And afterwards, he and my mum talked and I heard him say, "What if those guys were the ones trying to break in, and that's why the lock was broken?" We all went silent, letting the pieces fall into place. I dread in my bones. If I had never forced myself to barricade the door that night, and had just gone straight to bed, where would my sister, my mum and I be now? I, a 41-year-old female, live in Montana, and a few years ago I was forced to relocate after my landlord decided to rent the place to her son. The community I had lived in for 11.5 years has become incredibly expensive, so unfortunately I was forced to relocate to another city. Because of the unexpected move and associated costs, I moved in with a roommate. Then said roommate left to pursue better job prospects about 3 months after I'd moved in. Our unit was a triplex, so there were 2 gentlemen that inhabited the other units. I was never added to the lease, as the property manager required a full deposit, and I was not in a financially healthy spot at the time to pay one. I remained in the unit for 1.5 years on my own, paying the rent and utilities. I became very good friends with the man in the unit closest to mine, who we'll call Devon for this story, and he was 52 years old. Devon was a disabled veteran, as am I, but he was in recovery, so he held a soft spot in my heart. We shared meals, hung out, and discussed all of life's mysteries, and would look out for one another. Devon had gone to treatment for 6 weeks, and I had watched his cat while he was gone. Our friendship developed over the course of 1.5 years, but Devon had expressed a romantic interest, even though I had right from the beginning clearly informed him that I did not share those feelings, and we would never be more than just good friends. He seemed to be lonely, which made sense. However, I am a person who requires alone time to recharge my batteries. I set strict boundaries for Devon as he wanted to hang out all of the time, and I would catch him walking through the front yard multiple times a day to get the mail, which I believed was to see if I was outside so he could stop to chat. When I would leave in the morning to go to work, Devon was always outside to tell me I looked nice and to have a good day, which I told him made me feel uncomfortable. I said he should just send a text letting me know if he wanted to hang out, then wait for a response. There were a couple of times I yelled at him for overstepping my boundaries. The first, I had just gotten home and pulled into my garage. I was on a phone call and had stayed in the car, when Devon looked in through the garage window to see if I was home. I was annoyed but didn't really think much of it. Then the second time, I was getting dressed in my room in the summer, so the window was cracked a little. I felt this was safe as the window was not in a place that anyone should be walking by, as it was on my patio at the back of my home. But I caught Devon peeking through and absolutely lost it. I let Devon know under no uncertain terms his behaviour was inappropriate, and that if he didn't respect my boundaries, we would no longer be friends. Last year, while I was still in the home, I asked Devon to watch my dog for a couple of days so I could go to a family event out of state. Devon was happy to help, and I was very appreciative. But not long after I returned, I started to notice strange things in my home, but I really just thought it was me. For instance, I would be fairly certain I had locked my door in the morning when I'd left for work, but when I returned it would be unlocked, and I would be sure I had shut off all the lights, but when I got home in the evening one would be on. I really just thought it was absent-mindedness and thought nothing more of it. Fast forward a couple of months and my mum became sick with cancer. My sister watched my dog while I went to tend to my mum, when my sister reached out to me and asked if anyone else had a key to my apartment. I let her know she had the only spare key, but asked why. Similarly, she had experienced the same issues with lights and locks. I had not shared my concerns with my sister prior to her communicating hers with me, as I really just doubted my own sanity. But whilst I was out of town, I received a text message from Devon asking if I had a potato he could borrow. I let him know I was out of state with my mum, who was sick, and he didn't reply, which was out of character. But I had noticed a change in Devon's affect. He was more reserved and less friendly towards me. I thought it probably had to do with my firm adherence to my boundaries, which was okay. He didn't have to like them, just respect them. When I got back to town, one night I stayed over at my sister's house after helping her move, and as mentioned above, I was struggling financially, so I would carefully budget and plan my weekly meals. The morning before my sister's move, I had placed 3 pieces of bacon into a Ziploc bag to be used later for a BLT. But when I returned the following morning, much to my disbelief, there were only 2 pieces of bacon in the bag. I held the bag in my hands, knowing that there had been 3, and no longer did I doubt myself. I called my sister and let her know that someone had been getting into my house, and I always keep the place locked. The only logical thing that could have happened is that Devon had made a copy of my key when he had watched my dog in the fall. Then my sister reminded me about the potato text. The potato in the counter basket was gone. I had enough information to be certain that my neighbour had violated my trust and was no friend. However, I still wasn't afraid of him. As I mentioned, he is a disabled vet and somewhat feeble and sickly. I was not scared of a confrontation, so I immediately went to the hardware store and purchased a camera that streams to your phone once the motion detector has been activated. I placed it facing the side door where Devon would enter, and it also had a 2-way audio capability, so my plan was that when Devon decided to enter my home again, I would see it and say over the camera something to the effect of, "Get out of my house, put the key you copied on the counter, and never try to speak with me again or I will contact law enforcement." Now, as I wrote above, I was not on the lease and did not want to be homeless, so I could not turn to the property manager for help, and Devon knew it. In the evenings I started placing a jug of cat litter and a kitchen chair in front of the door that I knew Devon was accessing the apartment from, but I never expected he would attempt to come in while I was at home. And really, he had only taken a piece of uncooked bacon and a potato. Laying on the couch one night watching TV, I thought that I had heard something sliding on the floor in the laundry room where the door was, but I knew there was no way he could come in while I was home. My cat was running around playing, so I decided it was probably just her, and I was being paranoid because of all that had happened. However, the next morning whilst changing my laundry, I noticed the litter and chair had been pushed 3 to 4 inches. I checked the sensitivity of the camera and found that I was able to replicate by slowly opening the door. Devon tried to come in while I was at home. Why? That morning I took bear spray into the shower with me while my knees knocked. I was terrified. I felt vulnerable and violated. Devon knew that I knew now also. He knew that I had placed a barrier in front of the door. After that, he was never outside in the morning, nor did he walk through the yard to get his mail. I obtained a firearm for protection and did make a police report, but the police officer was annoyed with me as I did not want him to approach Devon, as all Devon would need to do is report me to the property manager and I would be homeless. I'm grateful though that whatever he was up to was apparently thwarted. The fact that he tried to come in while he knew I was home gives me the heebie-jeebies. I wonder if he'd gone through my underwear or watched me while I slept. Since my situation has greatly improved, I ended up moving out shortly after to take care of my mum. I got my own place again a few months ago, and I will never put my trust in another neighbour for pet or house sitting again. It still blows my mind that I had some douchebag stealing from me and likely also stalking me. This story just solidifies one should always trust their gut. There were so many times that a red flag was screaming, and I just thought I was being crazy. I have to get some context out of the way first. So let me start off by saying that I live in an apartment complex by a golf course country club on the edge of town. Since not many people live in this area, it can get pretty quiet at night. The complex is built partially into a small hill at the end of a road, with my apartment being on the back corner of the building on the ground floor. So the bottom of the windows in the living room and both bedrooms start literally a few inches above the ground outside. There is also a trail behind my apartment building that goes through a small wooded patch. I don't have much of a view since my living room windows face a good 15 to 20 foot patch of grass before a tree line separating it from a few houses on the next street over. This story has been ongoing for the last couple of months, and I'm not entirely sure if this is just paranoia or coincidental. Last summer, a family moved into a house on the next street over, a couple of houses down from my apartment. I've only seen one middle-aged man and a dog so far, and when I was talking to my Shih Tzu Harley outside one day, I noticed this man out in his backyard just standing with his arms crossed, swaying side to side, like an NPC character in 2000s video games, waiting to be interacted with. The dumpster shed area is in view of his backyard. We made eye contact, so I awkwardly waved and then just looked at my phone while Harley did her business, but I could tell from my peripheral vision that he didn't look away from us. We have the same breed of dog, so I just assumed he was probably thinking of letting them meet sometime, but I wondered why he didn't have his dog outside with him. I just went back inside quickly after Harley was done. Now my younger brother lives in the same complex as I do, but on the second floor. He told me that every now and then he'd see that man take his dog out into his backyard, but across the tree line into the complex's yard. He would circle the building slowly and a little too close to it before going back into his house. In September last year, my boyfriend at the time and I had split up, and the night I told him to leave, I went to a friend's house to vent. I didn't want to leave Harley home alone too long, so after about an hour or so I came back home and fell asleep on the couch, whilst I had a black screen rain sound video on YouTube playing. I woke up at around 2 a.m. to Harley going crazy, barking and growling. The other couch is right under the main window in my living room, and Harley had climbed up onto it and was barking at the window between the curtains. I got up to get her down and shut her up. Then my stomach dropped when I realized something. The curtains are on the thinner side, and I can normally faintly see the street lights from the next street over, so I started getting a little nervous, noticing that there was a black mass blocking some of the lights above where Harley was standing. I grabbed the remote to shut the TV off, as I was getting closer to the window, and when the TV turns off, it does so in the style of a retro one, where the picture closes in on itself. When I turned it off, the flash animation on the TV illuminated the room briefly. It was enough that I was able to make out the form of someone dressed in black dark clothes, who was crouched down looking into my window. But in the flash of the TV, they'd probably seen me too, because they ran away quickly. I picked up Harley and ran to the kitchen to grab a knife and went to my room, locking the door. I texted my ex asking him if he'd been outside of the window just then, but he replied no and asked what was happening. I didn't believe him because he's never awake that late, and told him I was about to call the police, so to just tell me the truth. He told me that I should call them either way, and sent me his live location, showing that he was at his friend's house over an hour away. I called the police and let them know I had seen someone outside my window, but they came and looked around, obviously finding nothing. But an officer told me they'd keep someone in the area, so to just call back if anything else happened. Over the next couple of weeks, around the same time, 2 to 3 a.m. each night, Harley would freak out at the window. But by the time I'd get to her, I couldn't see anyone outside. Fast forward to May 2024. This last week, I went through my storage closet and found some of my ex's things. I was out with some friends tonight when he came to pick them up, and he ended up texting me to come home so we could talk about something important. I got home and could see that he had a very puzzled look on his face. I asked what couldn't have been just a text, and he told me that while he was loading his stuff in his truck, He took Harley out quick and was approached by an older lady that lives on the second floor. Now the dumpster is at the end of the parking lot, and if you turn right you'll face the side of the building in the general area outside my living room window. There's a few big trees keeping the area back there pretty dark, even during the summer, so it's deeply shaded. She said that as she was taking her trash out, she heard a twig snap and looked in the direction it had come from. She said she saw a man outside my window, not just walking around. He was up close, peering into my living room, one hand on the window trying to block the light so he could see, and his phone in the other hand pointing inside my apartment. She yelled out asking him what the hell he was doing, but he just acted like he didn't hear her and walked away slowly in the opposite direction. She said it would be one thing if he was just walking through the yard and glanced over at my window, but he was full on pressing his face against the glass looking in. My blood ran cold and I got goosebumps. I have since bought a Ring camera, which is something I should have done a long time ago. I've lived in this apartment complex for several years and it's been great, until around a year ago when I got new neighbours downstairs. At first it was fine, aside from the frequent dirty looks and zero talk with the mum and 2 daughters that lived there. I know it's not a crime to be rude, and it wasn't that much of a bother, until one of the teenagers there started having guests over. Throughout the past year, these teens have basically become permanent guests and have recently vandalised the parking area, as well as the stairs, and have been ripping up wood pieces off the building and kicking the railings in. Now I understand that this is all hearsay considering I don't have any proof it was them, but to be frank, all of the vandalism is around their apartment, and they'd even spray painted their apartment letter on one of the parking spaces, so I don't think it's difficult to make the connection. And it didn't start happening until the teenage guests arrived. Again, I'm honestly just trying to be as non-confrontational as possible, so nothing was said to them as I felt there wasn't really much I could do without proof, nor was it more than just a nuisance. But then they started throwing food, or something resembling food, onto my car, and it happened around 4 times. At one point, they'd even thrown gravel or dirt all over my car, and 3 out of the 4 times this happened was when I'd parked in the spot they'd claimed as their own. I genuinely didn't park there to be malicious. It's literally just the parking spot right in front of my boyfriend's place, and I basically live there too. The last time they'd splattered some type of substance on my car, later in the day one of my other neighbours informed me that he had witnessed one of the teens repeatedly banging his car door against mine before driving off. It had left a dent and a report was made, and even with the officers present, the teens were all out there, one of them throwing out slurs, threats, yelling and trying to argue. They were really just showing their ignorance and silliness. But since the threats technically weren't at me, the officers apparently couldn't do anything. After the cops had left, I was going up the stairs, when of course one of them said something. It wasn't directed at me, but was definitely meant for me to hear. And I expect to get a lot of this for the next few days, especially from the teenage girls. I was then leaving my apartment, only to see 3 of them making their way up to my floor, one of them being the one who damaged my car. I know this isn't a crime, but I live a floor above these kids, and my only next door neighbour is the one who saw the kid damage my car, so I don't know why they would be up there. That is until I realised they were clearly trying to reignite the argument that took place with the officers minutes prior, which I hadn't actually engaged in, mostly because my brother had come to visit and my neighbour was also outside. The thing is, though, that interaction had left an especially bad taste in my mouth, because I'm aware that these kids don't just hang out up on my floor. So what was the plan for these teens? I really doubt this would escalate to them getting physical. But honestly, anything is possible with these kids, and I can only be aware and not engage. But regardless, being an adult, I just don't want to deal with this anymore, especially not at my doorstep. I would also like to reiterate that the adult that is signed on the lease for their apartment seems to never be home or hardly at all during the day, so it seems these, in total, maybe 5 kids, roam about completely unattended almost all day every day. My issue as of right now, with the threats and the slurs and the pure ignorance of kids not thinking of consequences or simply thinking ahead, makes me nervous to think I could at one point be swarmed by them for whatever reason, at any time of day, like I almost was with them trying to come up to my apartment to talk. Who knows what they're capable of, being emotional kids and all. Knowing I have to pass their apartment every single time I need to leave, and having to be extra aware and hope that things don't escalate even further than they already have, is really frustrating, and I really do love this complex. I have no intentions of leaving. Has anyone ever had similar neighbours, and how did you approach it with management? My neighbours have lived next to me for about 5 years. For the most part, we have been on pretty good terms. They're heavy smokers and often smoke marijuana and cigarettes, but I like to keep a few windows or screen doors open when I'm home, and often the smell comes in. I get really bad headaches from it, so I try to close them as soon as I catch a whiff, but by then it's usually too late and the smell is in my house. I've previously asked them to just shoot me a text when they are lighting up, but they smoke quite often, and there's multiple people, so they have different schedules. All I asked was for them to send a quick text before doing it. I don't have to respond, and they don't have to do anything else, but they didn't do this for a very long time. I would remind them and explain that I have really bad migraines because of it, have to take pills, and do all that I can to combat it from my side. All that I ask is that they do the bare minimum. But only recently, after years of asking, have they started to do this, and I have thanked them and said how much it helps. However, this isn't the main problem. For the last few years, my backyard has been getting remodeled, so for a while there's been a bunch of dirt and whatnot. Recently I had time to pay more attention to it and finish the remodel, but the same neighbours, who have 4 big dogs, use their backyard as a dumping ground for fecal matter. Emphasis on 4 really big dogs who leave 4 times the amount of feces and at a larger size. So when the wind blows from theirs to ours, the smell is, shall we say, interesting. Now, as I previously mentioned, I haven't used the backyard recently due to remodelling, so I've not been back there as much. I have left some of the windows and whatnot open, but never has smelled it to the point of it being an issue. But as it's newly refurbished, I'm trying to use my backyard more, but the stench is unbearable. It's hot and is left sitting out there for weeks at a time. I texted them again and explained the situation, and I'm not looking to start something up again, but I have remodelled and will be using the backyard more. I'm not throwing any loud rages, just small garden parties, and I even told them that they didn't have to keep it squeaky clean. But if I'm throwing a party a certain day, can I text you ahead of time so you have time to remove it before the party? We agreed, and first few times it worked. I texted and they removed. I don't like having to tell them to clean up their own dog poop, but I understand compromises must be made. However, the last year or so they have become worse and worse with maintaining their end of the deal. Sometimes they don't text back till the day after the party. They don't remove it, or have passive-aggressive remarks. I don't throw many parties and they aren't even always outside. I'd say only once a month maybe, so that's only 12 times a year they have to remove it. It has gotten to the point where they haven't cleaned it up. I'll set up for the outside, but the smell is so unbearable, my guests end up going back in. I spent a lot of money and put a lot of hard work into this remodel, and would like to use my own backyard. It's my daughter's birthday this week, so I texted them as usual. Hey, I'm having a small party for Lucy and a few of her friends in 2 days. Just wanted to let you know so you have time to clean up the dog stuff. Thank you. A day before the party I got a really passive-aggressive reply, more rude than usual, and it said, I can't drop everything I'm doing every second you want to throw a party. I won't bend to your whim anymore. No wonder your old neighbours left. They probably hated you. Please stop threats and harassing me and my husband." I was shocked. We have always been cordial, and I'm very understanding if something is going on in their personal life, if there was an emergency, or if they are out of town, etc. I responded back asking them if they were going to remove it, but I've had no response, and it's the night before the party now. I have been patient and understanding for years, but this week I'm filing an official complaint with police and their landlord. It is apparently illegal in our city to leave any pet feces on public or private property. It's a serious health and house code violation. Is there anything I should know or do before filing a complaint? I will not be warning them or giving them any heads up. I've given them plenty of time and leeway, but they take advantage of it. It was in 2018, back when I lived in the suburbs of Paris, and I'd been playing Pokemon Go since its release. I used to go out at night to play, always with my best friend on voice call, and it was a night like any other, following my usual route. At around 2 a.m, and I had already covered a good 2 kilometers, I found myself about 1 kilometer away from home, standing near a Pokestop, catching what I could whilst talking to my friend, just like every other night. It was a residential street with a few street lights, but quite dark as there was a field just behind it. After about 5 minutes, I noticed a man in his 30s on the opposite sidewalk, just a few meters away from me, holding hedge shears in his hands, and there was a pile of branches at his feet. I thought the man was just trimming the branches of his tree. However, when I described the scene to my friend, he said, "You should leave right away. No one does gardening in the middle of the night." But despite my friend's warning, I was so focused on Pokemon Go that I wanted to capture all the Pokemon before leaving, so I stayed, whilst keeping an eye on the man at the same time. As I looked at him though, I realised he wasn't cutting any branches, he was only staring at me. He would occasionally move and hide behind a parked van nearby whilst spying on me through the windows, but he knew full well that I could see him, and I began to feel scared. Despite my friends pleading for me to leave, I still hadn't caught all the Pokemon, so I hesitated to leave, and the man continued his strange behaviour, crossing over to my side of the street and hiding behind some bushes, all the while staring at me. Then he went back to his pile of branches and stared at me again. Finally I'd had enough and left, so I walked normally towards my home, trying not to show any fear. I had a straight path back, my friend on the call asking me to check behind me in case the man was following me. And indeed he was, still holding the hedge shears about 10 meters away. I then made a left turn instead of going straight, even though it made my journey longer. I wanted to be sure that he was following me and that it wasn't a coincidence, and he continued to follow me. I picked up my pace, taking snaps just in case something happened, and when I reached the end of the street, I was out of breath but safe. There was no one behind me and I was home, feeling relieved. Suddenly a white car pulled up right in front, stopped, and the driver's window rolled down. It was the man with his pruning shears. Now he knew where I lived. I rushed inside, locked everything, grabbed a kitchen knife and waited until someone woke up so I could go to bed. There were no further incidents. Nobody believed me, so we checked the surveillance cameras at home, and unfortunately I was right. I've lived in this gorgeous townhouse apartment for over 3 years now. The landlord is an actual person, the area is beautiful, the walls aren't prison white. It's the perfect location for mine and my wife's commute. There's just one problem. We have a neighbour who wants to control everything that happens within 20 feet of their home, and they share both walls with other townhouses. In the past 3 years, they've run out 3 tenants on the other side with their complaints, including a family because they filed so many noise complaints about their toddler. It started as noise complaints on the day we moved in. My wife was talking to a friend whilst decorating the patio at 3 in the afternoon, and the neighbouring wife ran out and asked her to be quiet because she works from home. We've been asked several times not to watch TV loudly, sometimes when we don't have anything on at all. They called the police on us, alleging that we smoke pot when we don't, and we let the police officer search our place. My wife had been vaping, but she switched to smoking cigarettes to help quit in the last few months, down to 2 cigarettes a day from 8. Our lease allows for smoking on the patio, and the HOA had explicitly allowed it until last year when it removed that rule, but didn't ban it. But the neighbour has come by several times asking that my wife not smoke because his wife had cancer in the past, and it makes her concerned for her health. Genuinely, if they had not been dicks for so long, we would have worked with them. But the boy just cried wolf too many times. As of today, my landlord has said that we can break our lease early with no penalty, or sign an amendment to our lease to not smoke anywhere on the property, because the neighbour has been messaging him daily, threatening to sue for assault and nuisance, and saying that my wife's smoking has caused his wife's cancer. Yes, they're willing to lie about having cancer currently when the argument for sympathy didn't work. Now, as much as I hate it, we are looking for options to move out and get some peace, even if we know it's a downgrade. But I don't intend to go quietly. Aside from reporting some HOA violations on them and taking advantage of the non-quiet hours to play some choice songs outside, I was considering participating in this Wiccan prosperity ritual that requires throwing aggressive mint seeds into the air, which might happen to land in the neighbour's garden. I also did some deep digging on the 2 of them, like I have found the divorce decree from her parents when she was 8, and his father's obituary. I've been texting the local Mormons for days because they're apparently vetting visit requests, and I do so hope these Mormons can help them deal with their trauma. Maybe we could display some signage for National Children of Divorce Day, and Father's Day is coming up too. It's extremely horrible, absolutely, but it's all public record, and who's to say it isn't from a genuine longing for them to get their heads screwed on tighter? I just hate them because they're going to get exactly what they want if they drive us out, and it's likely going to be a huge downgrade for us. My wife's nicotine habit isn't the driving force, of course, but we're all 30-year-olds and we're pretty sick of feeling like we can't do what we want, and what's perfectly legal in a property that we pay for. Even if she quits and we sign the amendment, they'll probably lie about smelling smoke just like they lied about the pot. Heck, they might not even have to lie about smelling it. Our neighbours on the other side smoke too. But I'm sure the burden of proof for the violations that would evict us is just their testimony, instead of an official report from police, as in the case of smoking pot. It's so bad that they can drive people out so effectively, and no one can do the same to them. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories in this episode. Please let me know what your views are, and hit that like and subscribe button. Until next time, keep being creepy.